Between Earthborn Rangers and Leviathan Wilds, us cooperative game fans with a naturalist, or at the very least a Save the Planet and or Mystical Guardians bent, are eating good, which makes for perfect timing for the arrival of Defenders of the Wild. A bit more of a revolutionist take on nature fighting back, what with the lizard slinging explosives at the mechanical invaders. So let's take a look at Outlandish Games' next Fight the Man follow-up to Block by Block. Deep in the wilderness, the machines have set up shop. Their stacked machine core serves as the home base for their terrible engines, treading through the land, forming obstructive walls, which, in turn, if fully encompassing a space, will construct factories, themselves populating vicious drones and polluting the environment. If left unchecked, too many factories constructed, too much pollution becoming full waste sites, or players suffering so much damage at the hands of the machines that two denizens of the same environment die, players will lose. Which is why you and your fellow players will work hard to make sure that doesn't happen. Each player takes on the role of one of 4 factions, represented by a pawn and consisting of a deck specializing in their faction's shtick. On a player's turn, they play a card from their hand, both defining their action points for the turn and usually with a situational when revealed or ongoing power. Then take actions to move their pawn, destroy robots, clear pollution, breach walls, set up camps in their faction's terrain, and if completely cleared, rewild factories. When actions are completed, the bad stuff card is flipped, instructing what nasty machinations the machines get up to. If all players manage to place all of their camps and all constructed factories have been rewilded, the defenders win. What's interesting about Defenders of the Wild, well, one of the interesting things is that the economy is all about time and support. See, forming your Liberator bases doesn't cost any resources aside from that you've met the threshold of support for your next base in line. Pretty much anything that makes a bad day for the machines nets you some support, from destroying bots to clearing pollution to breaching walls to rewilding factories. Then you can cash that in, place camp down, then draw up to your new hand size, which is really important because that's pretty much the only way you draw cards. If you got no cards in hand, you just have to top deck the next defender that you play and just accept whatever their action point allocation and ability is, which leads to some serious tactical disadvantages. But the point that I'm getting at is that pretty much all the actions in the game, both of the actions you take and on the part of the automated machine, are fairly rudimentary. There's no layers of resources, no skill checks, no rolling for damage. Well, aside from the bots, who if you take any action on their space or within one, if they're snipers on a factory, you roll a die to see if you take damage first. Point is, while there are various systems in the game, from the way that the engines move forth putting up their walls to the way that pollution spreads out, skipping over the fully polluted zones into the next areas, creating more and more tension for you to deal with, to breaching walls that don't actually destroy them for construction purposes, and heck, the yet unmentioned unique spendable and claimable at camps faction item type that every player gets access to based on the factions in play, from bread that gives you bonus actions to bombs that auto-breach walls or destroy bots without rolling for damage. There's a real simple immediacy to pretty much everything in the game that's either going to make or break your interest. Overall, Defenders of the Wild is a really great evolution of some of the core concepts of Block by Block. While not a proper successor to the game, the revolutionary identity and fundamental approach to cooperative game design persists. Here, things are a bit more streamlined, less loose ends, easier enemy operation, and more tactical options, especially when considering how players can collaborate to help one another in the tight margins of support, damage, and the machine spiraling out of control. The thematic conceit is also a bit easier to swallow too, for better or worse. Important concepts like intersectionality and collaboration are preserved by way of the item tokens, members of each faction who themselves might be denizens of different environments, and the fact that a single player exits the game if there are no unwilded factories and they build their last camp, meaning that if one player finishes their work too soon without considering the needs of the whole table, they may cause everything to fall apart. But there's a clean good guys, animals, versus bad guys, machines, that feels less sociologically complicated than the citizen revolutionaries versus violent law enforcement of its predecessor. But what I like best is that Defenders of the Wild focuses on being a great game first, while still inviting and even encouraging discussion about resistance, revolution, or just simple, thoughtful change. There are some levers to pull to adjust difficulty by way of swapping out any of the 7 default machine deck behavior cards with more advanced versions. And then each player faction has 2 leaders, each with their own awesome meeple that changes half of the 12-card defender deck, essentially acting as 2 different subclasses for that faction. And the solo mode, while still requiring use of 2 faction cards, manages a single hand that you draw from either deck as you choose. And you can optionally activate either of your 2 factions in a singular solo player turn, creating some interesting strategic possibilities to make up for the lower total amount of player cards available at the table. But for as much as I like the game, which I do, there's still something really rudimentary about it. Had this game come out 10 years ago, it'd be incredibly innovative. But cooperative games have come so far. Defenders of the Wild is well constructed and beautifully presented, but aside from its theme, it isn't particularly revolutionary, nor is there much in the way of variety. While the machine core will take different paths with the engines and pollution and where the factory's set up from game to game, it'll feel pretty familiar once you play a couple times. I'd have loved even some subtle change-up that gave a different flavor of oppression from game to game to game for you to face off against, other than just having better or worse versions of the same machine cards in the same 7 machine card deck, which I think ultimately would have made the decision space for playing the game and even maybe designing the game a little bit more rich. But as it stands, the game still, well, stands solid, a well-designed woodland Rage Against the Machine that is challenging, thoughtful, and fun. And that's our review. But let me know, what is your favorite woodland-based fantasy, cartoon, movie, whatever, where the critters are fighting in some sort of revolution? Put it in the comments below. And as always, thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting. Thanks for being such an awesome community. You know that I've been Jack for the Cardboard Herald.